Oh, guys, good, you hear? I am so excited. Guess what? I hope this isn't about your podcast again. Why, did you finally listen to it?
Da-da-da-da, 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 the Gloomy Next Door production. And now a message from our friends at Fetching Food.
The 1970s and 80s had Elbow, Gravy Train, Purina, Meow Mix, and Bell Bottoms. You've changed your clothes, now change how you feed your pet. Like Bell Bottoms, kick the kibble and join us in the 21st century with the healthiest diet for dogs and cats. Feed naturally, feed raw, feed Fetching Foods.
The Groomer Next Door podcast.
I'm from Missouri. That's all I know.
Hello, pups and kittens, and welcome to another fun-filled and informative episode of the Groomer Next Door podcast. I'm your host, Chris Green, and joining us this week is Laura PAKIS. She has an amazing blog. She's got Acme Canine. She is so many amazing things all rolled into one, and we are going to jump right into that in just a moment. But let's get into our fact of the week. In 2003, Dr. Roger Mugford invented the Wagometer, a device that claims to interpret a dog's exact mood by measuring the wag of its tail. I didn't know anything about that until really just about seconds ago, and I'm actually really curious about it. I guess I'm going to have to go and do some research on that. Don't think it actually worked because in 2003, 2018, I can kind of guess, since I haven't heard anything about it, it may not have done anything. Or I just have lived under a rock. Well, by that sound, Laura is about to enter the podcast studio. So with that said, welcome Laura PAKIS to the podcast.
This week on the podcast, we have a blogger, we have a dog trainer, we have a dog whisperer, in a sense. Probably more than I ever can be. We are joined this week by Laura PAKIS, and I'm so happy to be able to talk to you about Spike's Dog Blog, Acme Canine, and so much more. So thank you for joining us this week.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, what's great is Amy Shoji, she had put it out there, and it was so remarkable. It was like I almost in one day was getting multiple different people. I'm talking to multiple people, including yourself, and I was like, I like being in this kind of spot where you guys were like, hey, I want to talk to you. I'm like, I want to talk to you. It's worked out.
You.
But tell us your origin story, because that's how we kick off every interview. Every guest comes in, they tell us all of their origin story of how they became who they are. So how did Laura become Laura PAKIS?
As a dog trainer?
Or you can start anywhere you want. It's your story.
Okay. Well, in my second life, I had to make a career choice, and I had always been in the horticulture business and had dogs on the side, and my ex and I had trained dogs to be hunting dogs, and some of the things we did I didn't really approve of, but I didn't know any better, so I trained them that way, and they were successful, so I couldn't really say too much. So as I started coming up with a career choice, I went off to college to be a botanist, and while doing that, I gained a giant schnauzer named Woofy, and this dog was nothing like any other dog I had ever trained. Wasn't food-oriented at all, very aloof, very independent, just a real, and I don't want to say pain in the butt, but that's exactly what it was. So while learning to train him, I discovered a school in Columbus called National Canine, and so I decided, okay, since I'm discovering myself and finding a new career, maybe I will be a dog trainer, because I do have a background with animals, and I've always been involved with animal behavior. So I went to the school and took Woofy with me and learned another training method that involved the dog working for you and setting rules and making it very black and white when you're communicating with the dog. And it was amazing. Wolfie responded and became an absolutely wonderful demo dog for me. And that was kind of the start of it. So they just nonchalantly tell you that you can become a dog trainer and have your own business. And I must have been somewhere in the world where I said, sure, I can do this. And so I just put up my shingle and in November and started Acme Canine. And from that point on, it was kind of an amazing situation because I was getting calls from NBC4 to be on TV with them and talk about dog training, and all these avenues opened up, and I just got a niche with the veterinarians to work with dogs that had severe behavioral issues and aggression, and that's what I got to be known in the area, and so that's how I set up my business, and it's got me to where I am now, and I'm semi-retired and now writing about all my experiences and about dog care and dog training.
That's interesting. You know, it's funny how if you really listen, the one thing that we're supposed to not be able to communicate with really did communicate with you, and that's pets. Mm-hmm. You know, here's something that we hear a bark or a meow, and yet a lot of us were able to go, oh, I know what that means. Where, you know, a lot of people are just completely turned off to that. They have no idea. That's really cool. It's cool that you were able to find it. And, you know, we just recently adopted an Akita who we've just started putting in training because we wanted to be a shop dog, wanted to come with us to work every time we go to work every day. And he was left on a dirt lot pretty much all for his first 6 months and doesn't really have that understanding. He's smart, but that's the thing. Dogs are so smart. It's up to us to be able to teach them, and that's the hard part.
And I think what happens in many people, you know, they're very passionate about, you know, being a part of working with a dog, but they're not willing to see that. I mean, each dog is an individual, just like children. I have 3 kids, and each one had their own way of life, and I had to deal with how to interact with them to get them to do what I needed them to do. And I kind of applied that to dogs because I don't care what the breed is. Within that breed, you're going to have submissive dogs, dominant dogs, and you have to figure out what motivates them so that they do what you want them to, and they want to do what you want them to, and they're not just kind of like, oh, you're making me do this, you know, that type of thing. And it's fascinating, and I think people get tied up in, you know, totally positive or totally, you know, like just using e-collars or whatever it is, when really if you open your mind and say, this dog in this situation needs these things. So one of the things I'll do is like a canine assessment where I talk to the owners, and I make it sound, it's almost like doing a chess game. You make a move, the dog makes a move. You have this background to know that these are some of the things the dog's going to do, but they may fool you, and then you have to come up with a different plan. And so when I'm talking to the people, I'm assessing them to see how much time that they're able to put into the training, and their lifestyle, you know, with what they want the dog to do, because my goals shouldn't be their goals because it's their dog, and I want them to be happy. So, you know, you're kind of, it becomes this mental strain over time because you're really thinking about what's best for the person, what's best for the dog, and how do I accomplish my client's goals with the dog's personality and temperament. So I love it. It's just probably the best thing I've ever done because it takes so much mental energy to accomplish what you need to do. And unlike raising children that you start seeing results at like when they're in their 30s, it's pretty quick. You know, you see a dog change and you see them progressing, and it's very, very rewarding too. So it's cool.
I just think that really working with dogs, and same thing works with cats. It's kind of like kindergarten or daycare in a sense, mm-hmm. because of the age and the appropriate measures. And you know, you're going to have your really great kid that is just very smart and wants to learn, and then you're going to have that kid that's going to want to eat glue, and
yeah.
to say the least. And it's really what it comes down to is how do you handle it? How do you actually train it? And would you say that it's really more or less teaching the pet parent than it is teaching the dog?
Well, the pet parent, we tend to do a lot of things unconsciously that encourage a dog to act a certain way that probably in a different environment they wouldn't act that way. So you have to work with the parents to point out, hey, if you're encouraging your dog to do something you don't want him to do. So we'll say maybe don't pet him all the time, pet him only when they do something for you. It's just to kind of break some of this pattern up because I think people tend to treat dogs a lot like children, and many times that works perfect. I mean, some of the discipline and the setting boundaries and all those kind of things. I mean, behavior is behavior. It's going to work the same if it's a child or a chicken or a dog or a lion. But how a dog thinks is differently. They're wired differently than we are. So what we may assume as nurturing to a child, sometimes you can't do that to a dog because it's just encouraging them to be more afraid or less social or some things like that. So, yeah, you kind of have to educate the parents on dogs don't quite think the same as we do, and this is kind of the exceptions that you got to do. My favorite is usually by the second or third training session, if the clients have young children, they'll go, we're starting to use some of these techniques on our kids, and it's working great. Because it does. I mean, it's what you're doing is, you're being very clear with your rules. You're giving a consequence if they misbehave and they know what that is. It's not like it's just coming out of the sky. You're praising when they do well. You're encouraging them and motivating them. I mean, it's a great environment to learn in. And if you do that with a child, or if you do it with a dog, or even your employees, it's going to be successful because that's the behavior part of training. The art part of training is kind of this nebulous thing where you're reading the animal and trying to understand what they're saying, and it's a little harder to figure out, but it's a gut feeling that you're doing the right thing.
And it's funny because no matter what, it still always comes down to the pet parent, because you can only give so much advice, and then once they leave, well, they're bad behavior. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of know. I mean, I do a variety of classes, and I was doing group classes, and I did individual training, and I did residencies. You have to know the person in order to make it successful. If I had an extremely busy family, and I told them that they had to come to a group class on a certain day, I'm setting them up for failure, just like I'm setting their dog up for failure. But if I did a residency and got the dog to a certain point where I told them how to manage that dog's going to be much more successful in that environment than if they would, because they wouldn't make half the classes. And so you're always working with the person's lifestyle, I guess, is the best thing. And then, making sure that they know what to do to maintain things, So it's, yeah, it is. It's like anything. I mean, you can go to class and learn things, but unless you apply it, then it's really not worth going to the class.
Very true. Now, how many classes? Let's just say you're signed up to be in your class. How many per week do you do?
Like a group class. Once a week would be the group class for 6 weeks. So it's pretty basic. If I went to someone's home, I usually tell them that between the first and second session, no more than 10 days, because that's more for the person's learning ability, because they're going to forget over 10 days. And if you do it any sooner, I don't think that it's become enough of a pattern for them. But, usually once they start understanding the training method and know what to do, we can go about 2 weeks in between training. And that's kind of how I worked it out. So, yeah, and I've done it where people started off doing a class and they decided they wanted to do more individualized training because it was when you're teaching a class, you're teaching very general, very broad, suggestions, because you can't say your dog's submissive and your dog's dominant. Your class would never continue. So you pretty much just teach the basics of the class. You try to always explain why, because every command has a certain reason for doing it. And my opinion is, if you understand why you teach the sit and why you teach the down and why you teach the heel, you can apply it then in your own life with when your dog acts a certain way and go, oh, I need to put that dog in a heel because he's focusing more on a squirrel than he is on me. So, you know how to apply it better. So, it's just, that's the fun part about it. It's like, as long as you're willing to just kind of finagle into all different kinds of styles, it works really well.
It's funny, with our first Akita, which was really kind of this dog, Katana, has always been my, test dog. This is the one that I really started with, 6-7 years ago, something like that. She was my first rescue. I taught her how to, I off-leash trained her, even though at the time, I had 0% knowledge on how to do any of this stuff. And it was intuitive. I just kind of read her body language and the way she was. I was able to off-leash train her, where it was a great, honestly, it probably, and I'll be the first one to say, I probably should have failed, but some way, somehow it worked. And then we have a pit bull that, again, the stereotype dogs, we have them, and I'm very much against the labels that go with dogs. Yeah. I think it's the people, not the dog. But with the pit bull, this pit bull is my mother-in-law's, and the background on that dog is just so sad. This dog would take off, literally just take off down the street and run. And sometimes you wouldn't find her for days. And I was able to off-leash train that dog. So she's, for years now, I'm thinking 5 years at least. And before that, you couldn't even dare let her outside without losing her. She became off-leash trained, and so did the Chihuahua. And I've had a little bit more difficulties with the new Akita. Again, when you said squirrel, he goes, woo, squirrel, and takes off.
Yeah.
It's like, would you get back over it? Now, he does come back, but it's the initial takeoff that you're like, oh, my gosh. What? Yeah. And they do test you. And I don't even know where to go with him on this. I know that if I let the one cat that we have that's an indoor-outdoor cat, can't let that cat out in the morning before his morning bathroom. And that's another thing that pet parents really have to understand. Dogs actually have internal clocks to know when they need to go to the bathroom. If we miss them, well, what are you going to do? They're gonna have an accident. Right. And is there anything that you tell people, and I know it's kind of a little bit of a lengthy description, but in any of these circumstances, is there anything that you would tell pet parents in any of these examples of things that they need to be a little bit more intuitive to, or is this just, I would like to say this is just normal, but I think it's a little bit different for people like us because this is our life. Is there any kind of, we see this all the time and this is normal. Like, I get this.
I would say the biggest thing I noticed with house training is that for some reason, people need to see it more as a pattern that develops over time. So you can change patterns, but it takes like 3 months for a dog to change a pattern totally. So if like, say, we want the dog to go out at 9 o'clock in the morning, what are the things you need to do ahead of time so that ensures the dog has to go to the bathroom at that time? You could feed them maybe at 8. So I'm a little obsessive compulsive. So I'll have a log, and it'll have the time if the dog had an accident or didn't, what the dog did, and what the circumstances was. And you keep this log for like a week or two, and you're going to start seeing patterns of when the dog naturally has to go outside to the bathroom. Because if you're taking the dog out every 2 hours, they're always going to squirt. You know, that's just kind of a natural thing. But when they actually pee or they actually eliminate, it's going to be there, and that pattern's going to be very obvious. Plus, you'll start seeing, oh, my dog has to have a bowel movement an hour after they eat, or maybe it's 45 minutes, and those all become very obvious. So I really like, that's one thing that I use, and then to help them understand that they shouldn't go in the house, I use a crate, because to me, I'm dealing with a muscle that has to be trained, and if to help that be trained, I have to put the dog in an environment where they're going to be successful. So I can't let the dog run around the house because they may have an accident. So normally, say like I'm taking the dog out every 2 hours. At that 2 hour mark, I would put them in a crate for 15 minutes and then take them out. So now they may have an urgency to go, but they're learning to control that muscle so they don't go to the bathroom. And then it's not so much, I'm not making them stay there for an hour where it's really going to cause damage, but it's enough to start giving them that control of the muscle. And you keep building on that. So you can kind of set the pattern with a dog over time to go to the bathroom. But you can't go, a dog has to go to the bathroom. It's like, 10 hours being away from home. That's just a long time for anyone not to use the restroom.
Is it weird to say that I'm a little OCD as well when I think to it this way, and that is I will, one second. Okay. Sorry. We'll just pick up from there. Okay. I sit outside of my daughter's school and I'm waiting for her, and not usually, it's almost kind of a rarity that I ever have somebody come up to me, because I have a phone up to my ear, I have all this stuff going on, and now, some way, somehow, I'm going to have to try to figure out how to do this. So, 1 second. I'm going to, just, sorry about that. Just in case, if your car does start, just pull forward. I'll just kind of sit right here in case. Yeah. I did hear that. So do you know what almost kind of had I'm not a mechanic by any means, but almost like a new. But the starter could be alternator. Yeah. Yeah, just hit the 4 ways, and that way they'll know that I'm here for that reason. Right. That's where I go. Sorry. All right, I am sorry.
It's okay.
Things that, I always say this. When I record this podcast, the strangest things have always happened. There's 200 and some episodes, and there is a unique story almost in every one of them. So, yeah, I would tell, I really should just do an episode on crazy things that have happened while recording the podcast.
Yeah, that'd probably be funny to listen to.
I still think the funniest thing was one interview, and I never will tell the person's name who was. Really good guy, really good company, and it was still in their early days of having their company, and they would do all of their business in their bathroom. And so the interview was done while he was in the bathroom, and nobody knew but us. And I found that to be one of the funniest of all the episodes. That might have been one of the more funny, comical. What the what? So yeah. It everything that you can imagine, it happens. So, anyways, I will pick up from there. And what's funny is that I'll have to As long as my phone won't record, I'll have to chop that down, which is always fun. I even had one person where we lost connection, and that ended up, causing issues. There's always a very bizarre situation with this. It's really weird, and I can't do it at the shop because you know what it's like with loud barking and everything.
Gosh, yeah.
And I do it when this is the quietest time of my day, and yet not today. Sorry. And I'm just gonna kind of let this kind of go for a second because, if you haven't heard, Ollie roll down the window. That's the outside of the school right now as they're letting the kids out. So I'm gonna.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so usually when we're going, this is typically the time when we're recording and stuff like that. You can't tell that it's going on.
Mhm.
But some people are like, there's like that 1% that get thrown off, and just keep going. It's okay. So I'll just kind of wait to hit record again until after I pass all this up. And again, my daughter, she sees the phone up, so she knows, oh, he's recording. It doesn't affect her at all. She's just like, whatever. I think it's
great.
kind of funny that she's like that.
Mhm.
And she'll get in, and then it'll be loud for a second. I'll put that there for you. All right. And now we'll get quiet again, and that's usually the best part. So we'll pick up. I'm sorry to say, we were somewhere, and I kind of lost where we were. I'm sorry.
We're talking about house training and being OCD.
That's right, the OCD. I remember exactly where I was going with that because I had this bizarre kind of. I have this. You say you write it down. I actually mentally put it into my brain, so I thought that was really interesting. So let me hit record, and we'll get started back. I have a very strange kind of OCD myself, but it's a little bit different. I actually, for some reason, and I can't remember names, to save my life, and I can tell exactly the time that my dogs have to go to the bathroom, which is weird. And if we're going on a hike, I know exactly how far it is from the house to the spot that I'd like to go to the bathroom. I think that's
cool.
Is it, or is it just weird? Because I kind of go with weird. I'm like, even my daughter, she's like, this is the time that usually Katana likes to poop. I'm like, yeah, that's why we have bags with us.
Isn't that funny? Well, see, I think maybe you're also being very observant. Maybe they act a little different when it happens, or you never know. I mean, I remember there was a horse, and people were trying to figure out how the horse could count, and it turned out that the man was making, he was moving his eyelash or something very subtle, and the horse picked up on that, and that's why he would move his hoof and to indicate how many. So the horse really wasn't counting; it was the man teaching the horse how many times to paw the earth. I thought that was pretty fascinating, and I've seen dogs too. I'll fiddle around with mine, and sometimes just whisper something, and they hear me and they do it, and it's like, why don't you do this all the time? But it's kind of cool because they pick up on. I mean, I know dogs pick up on so many different cues that we move our hands, we do something. The best is after breakfast, my husband and I will just kind of slightly touch the table and move the chair away. That's an indication for them to run in the other room, and it's playtime.
Oh,
it's just so subtle, and I was watching and trying to figure out what's causing them to respond, and that was it. We touch the table and just slightly move back, and it's like both of them run real fast in the other room. Playtime.
Interesting.
Mhm.
And it's funny how they can tell time. That's another thing that people don't realize. They can tell time. They know when it's food. Our dogs, they know exactly when it's 9:30, or actually they get fed about 8:45 to 9:30, in between any of that, and they know. And if you're anything late, they just look at you and they're licking their lips and, where's my food? Where's my food? Where's my food?
Yeah. There was a study about that they can smell the air, and that tells them what time it is, or, depending on whether the dew is close to the ground and different things. I'm not sure what it is, but that was one study that said that they felt that was how dogs could tell time. But how do they know when you're coming home? That always amazes me, is that you could be watching TV and all of a sudden the dog's like, Phil's coming home, and they go to the door and it's like, how did you know?
I think they actually, and this is really just guesstimation from my perspective, because our dogs are exactly like this. They do that, and I think and this is going to sound ridiculous, but they recognize the sound of the engine. Only that I can consider.
Yeah, and that's real possible, because I've had dogs. Their own, like when they're reactive, like for a prey drive, they want to go after cars and stuff. It's like only Suburbans with certain kind of tires, or UPS trucks or something like that. And that was the only thing I could figure out, is that it was the whine of the tires that caused them to go after it, because other cars they wouldn't react to.
Yeah, they're so unique in so many different ways that, they'll know. I mean, even down to, and I always put cats into the same kind of category here. They even know when you're gonna. For example, I let the dogs out, and like I said, I off leash train them. Maybe because I'm lazy and I don't want to put a leash on them and walk them around. That might be the case, especially during winter, and you know what that's like. But I'll be standing there at the door, and one of my cats he'll come up to me and he'll meow, and he doesn't meow much, but he's just telling me, put me on my shoulder. I have to put him on my shoulder so he can look out and watch the dogs do whatever they do.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
it's like their job or something.
Yeah, it really is. It's like they have to do this. They have to be part of this, and I need to make sure I watch them, that they're okay. For what reason, I don't know. Same thing when you come home, it's the barking, and it's not I'm going to attack or intruder. It's, ooh, they're home. It's
right. They're very excited.
Yeah, and I always kind of reference back to the movie, was it Secret World of Pets or something like that, the animated movie, and I always think, I wonder if my dogs are like that. And I think, no, they're too lazy, way too lazy.
They're so. Think of what dogs can do. I mean, that was part of the, like, I'll do a little bit of support work. So, part of my job is to see how I can get a dog to help a person do a task. And it is amazing. In being a trainer, you do crazy things. So one of the things I taught my dog to do was open up the dryer, take the clothes out of the dryer, put them in a basket, and then I put a strap on the basket, and he would take the basket all the way upstairs. And, so it's a series of events that you can teach him, but it amazed me, and for one, I think he thought it was funny, but it amazed me how quickly he learned, and that he wanted to do that. And then it was almost like any time I opened up the dryer on my own, he'd look at me like, well, that's my job. Mm-hmm. And but when you're training them, they really do get into it. I mean, they love searching for things. I guess every dog has their own personality, so you can't force something on a dog. But when you find that connection, and I'm not kidding, dogs will do pretty much anything, and they're just capable of so much.
They really are, and that's kind of the. Almost, I feel a little bit bad, because you think to yourself, and I know you've had this happen, maybe it hasn't popped out in your mind, but I, of course, think it and say it. When you think about a lot of dogs that are out there right now who are doing more than so many people, and they're limited because they don't have the same abilities we have. I mean, for one, we have thumbs, and yet these dogs are out there doing remarkable things and have and I do think that all dogs need some kind of job or task. Mm-hmm. And yet, you think to yourself, gosh, people could really learn from just dogs. And the fact that you don't need to give them much besides love, food, and some affection. Obviously, love and affection are two different things. The way I look at it, love is yeah. So
caring and yeah,
and then the affection is unfortunately mine is they jump on the couch and they're pressed up against me and
there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's one thing. People always, there's a lot of generalizations out there with dog training, and you have to take the situation. If your dog was biting at your feet whenever you would move when you're on the couch, no, your dog should not be on the couch because that's a privilege. But if your dog's just being lovey and nothing else is, your dog's a good dog and, it doesn't have a lot of behavior issues, why not? I mean, that's a privilege and it's just like sleeping. People have these big controversies. Should your dog sleep in bed with you or not? Well, a lot has to do with your sleep pattern and their sleep pattern and then behavior. I mean, if you're sleeping like a log and just kind of can't move at all because the minute you move, your dog's going to, growl at you or snap at you, that's not a real healthy environment for you to have your dog in bed with you. So, that's the part of training that I wish was clearer to people, because a lot of times people do things that maybe they were taught as a child and then they apply it as an adult when really they're the adult and they should be working with the dog to change behaviors, not allowing things to happen.
Totally agree. Well, that goes with feeding as well. I mean, how many times and we were talking about it before we even started recording, we were talking about feeding and different poorly produced pet food, and it really does come down to, well, my dad or my mom fed it to our dog, and their dad or their mom fed it to their dog, so it's just a tradition. That's not really smart.
Well, I think sometimes it's hard to be a responsible person. It takes a little more effort, but once you do it, then you have a lot of repercussions. I mean, people are, dogs respond better when they're fed well, or, if they're trained to a point where you're not, the worst thing is if you're frustrated with a dog and you're just trying to put your finger in the dike and try to stop these behaviors and close curtains or do whatever you do, rather than take a couple months and dedicate it to training the dog so that the rest of their life they don't make you frustrated. And, that's a hard one. I've gone to people's homes where their couch is all chewed up because the dog has, just destroyed it and done all kinds of things. And then we talk about training and they're going, wow, that's really expensive. And I kind of, I don't want to be rude, but I try to politely point out the fact that your couch is very expensive too. And, it's like, make the effort to change it. A lot of people, I think, want to take a remote control and just say, and then the dog is better, but it takes effort, and it's an ongoing thing. You can't expect something out of a dog if you don't practice it, I guess. And, my guess is with you, you're very, I would consider you being disciplined if you got your dogs off leash, because dogs don't naturally just walk off leash. It's a pattern that's repeated many times, and there's boundaries set. So I think you just are good at it.
I'll really explain in a simple way. It's not really discipline. It's more or less trusting them and giving them the vote of confidence that I trust you enough to be able to do what you have to do and not have to be hovered over. I guess it's
right.
kind of like with how I raised my daughter. It's like, look, I'm here and I'm here to do whatever you need me to do. But I'm not going to baby you. I'm not going to cut your meat at 9 years old. I'm not going to, put you in a little baby tub and wash you. It's kind of that mentality and giving a dog that sense of trust opposed to, and I do know a lot of people do their commands a little bit different. Mine is the house, and they know, come in.
Mm-hmm.
And it really wasn't a harsh kind of training. It was a very, for the most part, we would be on leash at the beginning, and then I would take the leash off closer to the house, and use the word house, and that was really the simple side of it.
Mm-hmm.
But, sometimes I always make this joke. Teachers always said does not play well with others, but I play great with pets. Dogs and cats, I do a great job with. I can communicate with them, and I'm happy. It's the humans I have some kind of difficulty with.
Yeah, it tends to be a little harder, I know.
Yeah, we speak the same language, yet I just don't understand you. You know, it's one of those moments.
Well, I think there's a lot more motivating people than dogs. You know, dogs are pretty upfront with their feelings, and they're very willing to forgive. I think people hold grudges and have a lot of backstory when you're working with them, and so, you know, it's a little different.
Yeah, it's a baggage. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But what you're telling me, and this is dog training in a nutshell. You have a problem. You're at a certain place with a problem. You want to be in another place with a problem, and you work backwards and divide it up into tiny steps, and that's how you're always making your dog successful as you take the steps forward. One of the things they always say is, if your dog has failed at learning something, you've taken too big a step. Break it down and make the dog successful. So, you know, you're telling them from a certain point what house is, and you're not giving them much leeway at the beginning to fail in that, but then you trust them, and you're clear in your commands and what you demand out of them, and so you can move further and further back because they know what house is, and then, you know, it doesn't matter what the distance is because you've divided it up enough to make them successful at achieving it. And the same is with walking, you know, getting them off leash. If you're constantly controlling your dog on leash, what do you think they get used to? Mm-hmm. They feel, you know, it's that pull. So why not take a little extra time and teach them that they shouldn't pull, and then they start learning to walk next to you without the control of a leash, and then you can just take the leash off and they'll listen to you because you're communicating verbally and with your body.
Now, on our hikes, when we go on our little bike path, I have a leash on both of my dogs. That's just, you know, law. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you know, the same thing goes with, like, Sumo, who's our new Akita. He'll pull a little bit, and it's, okay, stop and sit.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't, we'll go again. If he does it again, stop, sit.
Mm-hmm.
And
it takes patience, too.
Yes. Yeah. But that's all that this really comes down to, is it's patience. And a lot of people don't understand that, you know, I'm just too busy in my time. I don't have time for patience. Well, we got to find them. I mean, that's the hard part.
Well, it's just like road rage and all the other things. You know, you got to kind of ease off of some of this stuff and say, you know, does it really matter? And then tone yourself down, because I think we could be angry all the time if we really wanted to.
Yeah, it just seems so pointless at times. There's things to be angry about, of course, but, you know. Now, something I see a lot, and I'm sure you do too, but maybe not, I don't know. I will have a customer come in with their dog, and they will say, oh, well, he has anxiety issues. But it's really not the dog that has the anxiety issue. It's actually the pet parent.
Yeah.
Do you deal with that a lot?
You do. That's one of my little talks, because that's the point where I try to point out that you're causing the behavior, not the dog. And, you know, it's hard. It's but if you you train them just like the dog. I mean, you slowly work with the owners and try to change. I always say it's going to be a lifestyle change with you, and give them some things to work on, so when the next time you come, the dog is more relaxed, but it's actually because the owner's more confident and less hovering on the dog. And yeah, it's fascinating. You know, I think people in their heart are trying, you know, they want to do the best for the dog, but they have different ways that they were raised, and a lot of that comes into play with when you're taking care of a dog. And well, you see it all, you know, when you train enough dogs and people.
True. I mean, it's funny because it's like, you don't want to tell them, no, your dog really doesn't have this anxiety. The anxiety's going from your body into your hand, down through the leash, into the dog. It's really cool. You know, and that's something that I always try to explain to people, and it's always so nice to talk to somebody who actually speaks this language too. But
well, yeah, having children too, I think helps a lot, because you can see when kids have a high energy, if you get caught up in it and are high energy with it, you're in trouble. But if you start slowing down and talking slower, all of a sudden, they kind of brings that energy level down. And dogs are much more receptive than children on that, but it's amazing to see.
It really is. Now, there's another hot topic that I wanted to talk to you about, because it's so important. And I think a lot of pet parents make this mistake of thinking, oh, it's cute, it's not a big deal. Yet, maybe it's just me, but I think this is a really big deal, and that's dogs that are mouthing. Mouthing to me, yep, I'm not alone here. It's like,
no,
it's cute. No, it's not cute. It's a bad thing. And I never know how to tell people exactly in the right words it's wrong. How do you tell people, and how do you correct them?
Well, unfortunately, I had some experience where a client, I ended up in court with the client because the dog was in the front yard. A little girl came by, went to pet the dog, and the dog was mouthy and wasn't biting the girl, but had put its mouth on her, and the girl pulled her hand away and got a cut on her hand. And it got really out of hand. And so there was all this stuff. So just knowing that there can be mistakes made, and then you have these problems with your neighbor thinking that the dog needs to be put down and all this kind of stuff. I just say the dog doesn't need to mouth you. This is a carryover from when they were puppies. It's called, they call it play biting. It's just the way dogs interact, but it's not a human-dog interaction, and it really should be stopped. And I know a lot of people say, well, they don't bite hard or this or that. It's like, that's not the situation. It's what happens if. And, and I try to always explain about the little girl and what happened there. But the best way to stop it is, you set boundaries. So you play with the dog and they get excited and they start play biting with you. Stop the play. And, of course you say no and stop. And then you just go right back to playing. And every time the dog puts their hand, their mouth on your hand, you just stop. It's explaining to the dog that we can still play, but it's more on my terms and you don't need to do this. And most dogs pick up on that. Puppies, you sometimes have to do this thing called the play bite hold, where you're actually kind of holding their mouth. You put them, there's a position, you kind of put them between your legs so they can't get away, and you just hold them very gently so that they can get their tongue in and out, and you just no, and you're just telling them that that's inappropriate, because the way I look at it is when you take on a puppy, you've become the surrogate mother, and that puppy is still learning even though it's living with you. And so you need to teach behaviors that are appropriate to the puppy so that it can exist in our human world. And that's one of them, is the play biting. It's terrible. I mean, so many dogs, when they get excited like that, and oh my God, yeah.
And you know what, I'm going to kind of transition just ever so slightly and segue into something else that really does come into the same conversation, that's plain rough. You know how that old mentality that you're only exerting all of the energy? Not the case. You don't want to play rough, because then what happens? But bad things happen. And I'm sure you have a great way of putting this, much better than me.
Well, it escalates. When a dog is in a high energy state, two things can happen. They can either play or they can get very aggressive. And depending on the situation, you never really know when they're going to, when that switch is going to click on them. We're teaching them what's right and wrong. I call it dog etiquette, because I really feel that we want a dog to be well behaved in our environment, and they're more than willing. They're domesticated. They're more willing to do that and accept those things, because they're very easygoing animals. They like to adjust and please us, and so they'll do what we want pretty much. So if you're roughhousing with a dog, and when you play tug with a dog, there's there's so many things involved in there. Dogs, it's really not a real natural thing for dogs to play tug. They usually play with each other and kind of butt each other and, gnaw on each other and stuff. So when you're playing tug, you're automatically doing kind of a dominant behavior. I have something, and I'm pulling it away from you, but yet I want you to be very dominant and pull it away from me. And so it's not probably one of the best things to do with a dog. I'd rather do things like, mind games, find this treat or find a toy or just tricks or whatever, so that the dog's mentally stimulated rather than trying to develop their prey drive and that type of thing. When you teach dogs for protection training, guess what you're doing? You're playing tug, you're doing roughhousing, you're doing a lot of the things because you want this dog to respond very assertively towards whatever you cause to be a threat. So you're teaching the dog this. You don't want that dog to be doing it on their own, because if a dog that doesn't have an out can become a very, very aggressive dog and unpredictable. So it's not a good idea.
I couldn't say it that well. That's why I'm like, you know what, I'm going to pass that one right over to you, because...
Yeah. It comes from all the things that you do with, like, I see so many people tell me, I want my dog to be a protection dog. That's why it's barking out the door and barking all these things. And I'm going, you know what? What stops your dog from determining what is a threat and what isn't a threat? You're nowhere involved in that. Your dog is making all those decisions for you. And that's not a good environment, because dogs, they don't make very good decisions at times, and we need to be there to kind of help them through some of those things. So I always try to say, if you have a good relationship with your dog and you're afraid, that dog is going to be the best protection dog that you ever wanted.
Mm-hmm. I don't worry about if somebody was to break into my house. I don't need anything besides my two Akitas alone. That's going to do it, especially since one's 80-some pounds.
Oh my God! Just looking at it will probably be enough for a person.
And you know exactly when an Akita barks, it's a different type of bark. I mean,
God, yes.
This is wolf, and it's so mild, and yet then when they do the full bark, you're like, "Ooh, I'm afraid of you," and yet you're protecting me. But even at that, you can have dogs that are Akitas, pit bulls, Doberman pinschers, whatever, Rottweilers. You don't have to actually breed them to be a protection. They're going to protect you. Their whole responsibility in life and purpose in their mind, I am here to protect master and my domain.
Right. Yeah, your job is to tone them down and set boundaries so that they don't make mistakes and see something as a threat. So yeah, that's they call them high caliber dogs because that's in them. They have this that's part of their instincts is that protection and to be very alert to strange, scratches on the window or noises or whatever, movements and things.
I always think it's kind of funny because I'm like, you don't need to protect. You don't need to, make this dog. It's like I've heard this case made, and I'm just right away. My hand just goes right over my face, and I would never feed raw. Now, my dogs are fed raw. My cats are fed raw, and I would never do that because I wouldn't want them to have the taste of blood. I'm like, you're kidding. You really are kidding.
That's part of the, the assumptions, and then it becomes, they feel it's truth, but it's actually, what is it based on? I mean, that's false facts, and that's where education, it's almost an ongoing thing for any kind of canine professional. You have to educate people because there's all these myths going around that when you're in the business, you just shake your head going, oh my God, just like a greyhound can't sit. Like, well, there's reasons why they have difficulty, but they can sit. I mean, it's just their muscles that are kind of stopping them from doing a nice sit. But, or you should never have a husky off the leash because they will run away. Well, any dog that isn't trained. So, it's based on some truth, but oh my gosh, it's amazing. I'm sure you hear it a lot with grooming too, because, there's things that people think are right, and it's crazy.
Well, a lot of it, and I'm sure you go through this, is you hear it, and we and I'll make this one as simple as possible for when people come to us with these questions. We simply say we know of a couple great trainers. We actually have one that we take our own dog to just because we want to make sure we get that good Samaritan type performance at a sumo. And I'm not going to, like I said at the very beginning of all this, I had 0% training, and I'd say I'm at 2% right now, so I'm not anywhere near what you guys are. You guys are trained, so we always say, look, here's what we would suggest, and it's always go to a qualified trainer. And this is exactly where you want to be. This is exactly what you want to do, because you're going to go in circles sometimes, and then you're going to use a bunch of words, and dogs are not going to respond to a full vocabulary. They want quick, simple, one-word responses. Sit, stay, come, house, whatever. And they don't need you to go their name and then da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They just want to, it's quick. Let's just get this over with, all right? People think that, no, we have to have a full conversation. It's like, no. Yeah. But these rumors do come out, and I'm not saying all, I'm saying a very small percentage, but a lot of this comes from veterinarians, too. They perpetuate this cycle, too.
Well, they're not, from what I understand, they get one course, I believe, in behavioral training or something like that. So I feel that we all have our own specialty, and I don't give vet advice, I don't give grooming advice, I do training. But I always refer, because to me, that way I know the person's getting the best of every world that they need to. I'm not a nutritionist, I have some ideas, but here, talk to someone that's knowledgeable on it. So I think that helps a little bit, because I know we get a lot of people that, the vet told us to slap the dog on the nose, and it's like, well, that's one way. And see, you're always trying to help, but it's unfortunate, but there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I don't think the internet helps very much at times. So it's good when there's people that have integrity and are willing to share good information and get it out there.
That sums up every bit of it. And you're right. I mean, there is a great deal of information, and some good, some bad, and a lot of the information you do see, and I know you see it out there too, is a lot of the old stuff that has been proven to not work. But it's still out there and still circulating. You're like, how is this still out there? We know it's not going to work. I mean, roll up the newspaper and pop them on the nose. I'm like, how is that going to teach anybody anything?
Yeah, and that's what you're dealing with when you have a person that had a child, had a dog when they were a kid, and that's kind of the training method and all these things, and then now they have a dog as an adult, and they're still doing some of those things, and they're having problems.
True.
And so it's a slow process educating people, but I think it's necessary.
Oh, it's very necessary. Now, what's great about what you're doing with Acme Canine is that you're not just saying, well, it's just me. You actually have people who actually work with you as well, which is cool. And I'm going to say this, and I'll go right out there and put my name on this part, and that is, you're not saying it's all about me. Laura PAKIS training. And I know you know exactly where I'm going here. A lot of people are just saying, I know it all. And I'm not speaking of anybody in particular, but there's a lot of people who will do that. And you're like, I have an actual group, so it's not about just me. And that, I love that. And anything you wanted to throw in on that, I would love to hear.
Oh, well, I'm always looking for experts to help write on the blog, because I think it just, to me, if I can form a canine resource for people to go to, I would love it, because the more information in a centrally located area where you can ask questions and communicate, I mean, that's got to help. I've had people even contact me, and they're seeing a dog trainer, and they're not quite sure, and they'll ask, like, my advice or someone else's advice on it, and we can at least give them, and it's almost like getting a second opinion, but we can reassure them about certain things and maybe say, well, why don't you ask this question to help answer. Because, people are putting their trust of their animal, and, this is the way it's got to be to train these dogs, and sometimes maybe the match isn't quite right, and it's good to have that second opinion just to make sure that you do have the right trainer for your dog.
And that's a huge thing right there, is the right trainer for your dog. I mean, everybody is not suited for that one dog, or even for that pet parent. And right. We say that about grooming. You can go to a big box store. It doesn't mean that you're going to get this perfect cut. Doesn't mean if you're going to go to a mall and pop, you're going to get the perfect cut. It really is how your dog is going to respond to the person. Same thing goes with veterinarians. Yeah. You got to find the right person, because sometimes they may be qualified. It just may not be a right fit, and then you're just pushing and pushing at it. Drives me nuts. Right. Well, no, we're dealing with living things. So, yeah. I mean, how can you expect something different? I think I had some child psychiatrists. They were having problems with their dog, and it just cracked me up when I was working with them, because I'd do something and explain it, and they'd rattle off some medical reason that happens in children. Oh yeah, that's blah 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 blah. And we went through this whole session, and after the hour, I'm going, okay, so all the things to do, and they said, you know what, we never made that relationship that we can treat a dog in the same way as we would help with children with some of their behavioral issues. And it just kind of stuck in my head, like, that's my job, is to kind of point things out that are obvious to me and seem common sense, but they really aren't to the person that owns the dog or hasn't had that much dog experience. Totally true. Totally true. Now, let's go into, because you had mentioned blog, Spike's Dog Blog. How did you get started with Spike's Dog Blog? Oh, I had a crazy dog named Spike. He kind of started the blog because he was a French Bulldog Shih Tzu mix. He looked kind of like a brindle Yoda, and just a real personality. And we would always joke around and have like Spike saying things. He always put like a cigar in his mouth and say, "Oh, Spike would say this." So we started saying, we should write something like that. So we started writing a blog kind of from the dog's point of view, and so a lot of they actually are that way, and I've kind of continued it with my two other dogs, Autumn and Penny, that they write it from the dog's point of view, because you can cover a lot of things that might be a little bit sensitive when it comes from the dog rather than it comes from a person. So we've done that a couple times. And then we just, it's one of those things about getting things out. So every client that ever worked with me or showed some interest, in what we did, they would always be on the, we'd hook them up with the blog so that it was a supplement to what their learning experience was. I'm a real believer in explaining why, because to me it solves a lot of the problems in the future. So, when we'll always give them handouts and different things, and several clients said, this is great information. You should make it more accessible to people. And so that's kind of how it got started, and we've been doing it, probably since 2004, I think. So there's a lot of information on there. I said to everybody who has a blog, I never know where to start. That beginning, middle, and end, I just never can get there. And I commend you for it. Thanks. But how I do it is when you listen to podcasts, I read things and go, oh my gosh, I got to write about that. So that's where I get a lot of my subject matter is this passion, because it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this person said this. And so then I'll write about something to try to help educate people on a different, this is not what you should be doing. This is probably a better way to go about it. So that's a lot of it. And then my knowledge over time, how to deal with separation anxiety and the things I've learned with aggression. And clients are, they're my best source of information. They'll ask me a question and I'll go, oh my God, that makes the perfect article. So then I start writing about that too. Kennel aggression, that's my favorite. Still my favorite. Kennel aggression can just be a pain in the bahookie. Oh my gosh, yes. And of course, having a pet salon, what do you think we have?
Oh.
That's fun to work with, I'll tell you.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. Yeah.
You can't really train through it. All you can do is try to bridge some kind of communication between the dog and you and hope it works.
Yeah. Sometimes, I use commands to refocus the dogs to help them, overcome some of their instincts and fears. A lot of times having your dog do a command in the kennel is a good way to start breaking that pattern. So you might want to try that.
It's always so funny. We tell the pet parents about this, and again, it's really what happens when the kid goes home, and if there's ever going to be any kind of work. And sometimes it could just be a previous groomer or previous place was really scary, and there's that residual kind of fear, and then you can work past it. But boy, that one's a trick.
Oh my gosh, yeah, because everything is head on too, which is pretty much, that's a threatening signal already because you're facing the dog head on, you're doing a lot of things like that, so I could see how that could even be brought out. I never even thought about that one. Yeah, that's a crazy one.
The simple way, and I'll even give this one out, and the simple way is that we have one of those slip leads, and we lasso it, so it goes around, where their neck would be, and then that will control them towards you, and then you're able, without getting bit, to kind of reach around. And again, this is all in art form, so please, folks, don't try it at home. It takes a little bit of some kind of approach, and you can talk to them. Sometimes if you don't even have to, right away reach and go for them. You talk to them, but by positioning them and having that little bit of control, that's exactly where it really comes down to, where I guess the obedience comes into it. It's the control. Once a dog knows who's in control,
yep, they respect you.
They do. And, I always kind of laugh because I'm like, you don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to be forceful.
No.
You really just, they have to know, okay, you're going to be in control of it, and it does work. And look, if dogs are not kennel trained, that's a whole new experience in its own self. So that could be a challenge, especially if they've never seen a kennel before.
Wow, that's a real interesting one. I would never have thought of that. We'll do things like yawn or scratch our legs, any kind of calming signal. Of course, you're not making direct contact with the eyes and stuff, but yeah, that's a real tough one.
See, if I ever
think about that for grooming,
if I ever see excessive yawning, that would be a sign of, and this is just what I would see it as, a sign of stress, overstressed.
Yeah, but it's a stress reliever, so it's called the calming signal. So if you do it, you're letting the dog know that you're not a threat.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the dog itself doing it.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, if the dog's doing it, then, yeah, you know that they're trying to tell you, I can't handle this situation.
Yeah.
But, yes, if you do that and if you kind of scratch your leg, those are easy signals to give to a dog that, you're not trying to, dominate them or anything like that. So it could tone them down a little bit.
It's funny, and I'm sure you've covered this part, and that is, and I'm going to say this in a weird way, but I've never really dealt with this, but men in this profession, it's very uncommon because usually there are a lot of aggressions, that male aggression with dogs. I don't see that. And I'm not a small guy. I'm a very tall guy, so you would think that I'd have two strikes against me right out the gate, but if I have a dog that's upset or scared, I'll usually just sit down on the floor, have the lead, and I'll just talk to him, and it works.
Yeah, right. Because you're making yourself smaller. You're not as much of a threat. You're using your patience because you're not forcing the dog to do something. You're making them do it more on their time than yours. So you're setting the dog up for success. I don't think a lot of people think about that. They, it's like, oh, I got to get this dog done. They, go in there, grab the dog, and pull him out, and there you go. Now you have a bad experience. Now, how do we change that bad experience? And they say it takes like 10 good experiences to counter one bad experience. So just like nail trims and stuff. I mean, it's a hard process to really get the dog not to feel. I mean, they had a bad experience. They don't want it again. So and that's how they learn, is off of experiences. So you really got to work on those things.
It drives. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was going to ask you, do you offer where when they're puppies they can come in and experience your facility and get used to the smells and sounds and stuff?
We do. We actually encourage come in, have a meet and greet first. The way we designed our shop is an open concept, so that the kennels are in the same room with us. It's just one spot. Everything's open, so anybody can see everything. And that way the dogs don't, even cats, they're not isolated in another room. So they're not, feeling like they're being kenneled. And of course they can look, if they look, I mean, the kennels are just kennels. There are no barriers to any of them. So they can kind of see in a 360 angle. They can look to the left and they can see, out the main glass, which is, quite a few feet past our little area. But we make sure, and we definitely always recommend, if you have a puppy, definitely come in for a meet and greet first so that it's not the veterinary clinic, because again, that's a big thing. The other thing that we always tell people is don't take, especially a puppy, don't take a puppy to the vet and then over to the actual groomer, because they'll associate the same.
Yeah.
They're just little things.
Right, they're absorbing everything. So, yeah, that's very good.
Here's something that will really probably spin your head. And I've heard of them, and I just cringe. And there's groomers out there that love to pride themselves that they can have your dog back in 1 hour. That's not a good thing. That is a terrible thing. Can you imagine going in, you're bathed, dried, and groomed all in an hour?
That's a lot of stress.
And people don't realize, that's a great thing because it's really quick. This is a life. Yeah. This isn't fast food. You shouldn't be just putting... Can you imagine doing that to a 3-year-old child? I mean, trauma. So yes. And nail trimming, I don't like to use the actual standard nail trimmers. I use a grinder, less abrasive. So they don't have that clink. Can you imagine that clink on your fingers? Oh, gosh, that would... Then you think of the German Shepherd nails or a Husky nails that are huge. Yeah, that would be awful.
Yeah, we've started with our puppy classes where people tend to know to handle the feet now, and so we'll take them to the point of we want them to splay the toes and take each toe and maybe touch like a spoon next to it so they get used to the metal touch. So it's a natural process. It's not like one day you just start clipping. Because I think a lot of people, when they're teaching them, they want to get it done. And it's like, well, this is a training experience, and learning experience for the dog. It's not, to get the nails trimmed. And so we've worked a lot with that with our clients too, because, just one thing that was kind of misunderstood. There's a difference between the task and teaching, and sometimes it takes a little longer.
One thing that I've noticed in this industry is that whether you're a veterinarian, you're a trainer, you're a groomer, you're part of a boarding facility, is that we're all part of, in a percentage of these dogs' lives. And if all of us keep at a certain pace and follow each other's rules so that we can best treat them, we can completely wipe out all of the garbage that's out there and all the negative.
I even got to the point where we would call the vets up and say, okay, what's going on now? What's the most common disease, or what are dogs coming in for? Because being in a boarding facility, the dogs are coming through, and we can see people and maybe say, if you notice this with your dog, this is what's going on at the vet's, and so we may need to go to the vet. So, communicating back and forth and helping people out. We've had, we always had groomers come because, part of the boarding thing is that you give them a bath. Mm-hmm. We were giving terrible baths to the dogs. It took, the groomer to show us this is how you give a good bath so it's not so stressed, and what the water temperature. And it was a wonderful learning experience, but I don't know if people interact that much. It takes time.
It's a
really
science.
Would be nice.
It is a science, and it's a science to all of this. From top to bottom, it's understanding what's in front of you. Don't look at it as a dollar sign. That's another thing that I think we all can say we see, is that some people just treat it as a dollar. And
True.
It's a life. It's another life. How we're treating this as if it's just money. It's currency. It doesn't matter. It could be cold water. What's it going to know? Are you crazy? Seriously. It has pain receptors. It has nerves. How can you think that way? But they do.
Well, they do, right. And I think the thing is, your gestures and your true passion, once, if it comes out, and a lot of times I feel that the good people are going to come to you, and you don't have to worry about your business. If you're doing a good job and you really care about the dog, it shows. And people appreciate it.
We kind of have people upset that we can't get them in soon enough. So,
yeah, that's a bad problem, huh?
It's a bad problem, especially when they're like, well, can you just work a weekend here just to kind of,
Oh, yeah.
I like to, but I do need some other time to do other things.
Well, you need downtime like everybody.
I don't know what that is. Actually, I do take Sundays as my down day. That's the only day I take in a week. So let's move on to, is it KSCO Pet Radio, the podcast that you have on your website?
Yeah. I hooked up with David. He's out in California, and we do. I do dog training by radio, and we're kind of talking more about different issues, and it's still dog training, but it's more behavioral things that we're working on. But it's really a good radio. You can listen to it on the computer. There's an internet way of doing it. I'm not that way kind of person that can explain it, but he'll bring on the most fascinating guests. There's a person that her passion is making sure that dogs' seat harnesses don't break when you have a car accident, and different things like that. And so she actually she was on there, and it's a big. It's not just like a little hobby anymore. It's actually her side business, and they test cars with these dog harnesses, and it's sad to know that most harnesses don't really work, and that's a bad sign. But he's had different rescues on, and he's had people. There's I don't know the initials, but it's the behavioral. It's a group of organization for behavioral canine professionals. I don't know it, but they have a thing that's really cool. They're trying to get as many people as possible, but they have a little test that you take, and they want you to tell what breeds are in this dog. And so you look at this picture, and then they give you some examples of what it might be in the dog, and you pick them, and they're going to do a study on it because they're trying. Too many people look at animals and say, oh, that's a pit bull or that's this. And so they're trying to actually figure out if people can actually identify certain breeds in dogs, even though it may have been 5 generations past or something like that. So that was kind of an interesting one. But yeah, he does a really nice job, and been doing that for several months now. That's on Sundays I'm from Ohio, so my time is I get on around 3 or 4, but it's noon to 3 California time.
It's always so funny because when I started doing this, nobody thought about doing anything when it came to pets. And it's been 4 years and I've watched it grow, and I'm actually quite happy. I'm like, hey, you know what? This is good. At least people are jumping in on it, because there's so many topics, and so many people are not able to actually have a voice when they should. let's stop talking about garbage that has no significance. Let's talk about something that actually is going to benefit. And
and
fluffed.
And the more knowledge you gain, the better it is, the better understanding you have of your animals, and the better way you can care for them better, I think, because you do understand them better.
Agreed.
And that's the whole purpose, I think.
Now, some of your accolades, just a couple of your accolades, IACP, Women in Pet Industry, and one that I'm actually going to be joining, or at least attempting to join, is the Dog Writers Association of America. So that's just to say it a little bit. I mean, I'm sure you have a great deal more. That is really impressive. Very impressive.
Oh, thank you. Well, you can tell I'm passionate about it. I mean, it's been a way of life for so many years. I know I'm a dog trainer because I can actually now walk up to a dog and they already know that I'm a leader, and people will go, my dog never acts this way. Why is it acting this way around you? And it's like, it's so ingrained in me now that, I don't think I could act any other way.
Totally understand. And now, do you still write for the local magazine?
I write for Pet Boarding and Daycare Magazine, and actually I'm going to be out there next weekend giving a workshop on body language, and also something that you might appreciate is physical exams on dogs. People should give this physical exam. It's called the snout to tail. You do it every day. It's, your dog is going to be the easiest to handle because they've been touched and prodded all over the place, and they're used to you doing it, and you find things, if they have an injury or a lump or a bump, or maybe you notice something with their tooth, you're able to find it very quickly. And, I started at the boarding facility, and I really think that's one of the things that, I really promote for daycares and boarding facilities to do that, because you miss out on a lot of things. The dog's in your care, but unless you're right on that dog, you're going to miss the cuts, and you're going to miss some of the diseases that they have, like, canine cough or something like that, but you can catch it very quickly if you do these exams every day.
And they're really simple. I mean, it's not like you don't have to have DVM at the end of your name to do it. It's really simple, and for all of us who actually get our hands on these dogs, it's really quite simple. And I don't understand why people don't say, hey, did you notice that your dog has a lump on its right back hip, or it had a weird cut right here? And you always hear the most interesting stories. I mean, I had one time one person dropped off their dog, and I saw this dog many times, and it had a really interesting bowel movement, and it was a different color than I've ever seen. And I mentioned to them, and they go, yep, that would explain it. And I had this curiosity of, what do you mean? There was a donkey that had passed away on our property, and it got over to it and ate a great deal of it. So I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Really? You could have told me that before. But
right, the dog's in your care, so you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I had never seen anything like that before, and they're like, yeah, it's probably that reason. And transparency. I think that we're in a whole new age of it, and why we can't have this dialogue with people, it's needed. I mean, how many times will you actually tell somebody, hey, this is wrong, and I didn't even notice it?
Yeah. That's a big thing. Yeah, we call it being dog-centric. I mean, the dog is your main purpose, and everything revolves around it. That's how your business should work. It shouldn't be the dog is only a part of your business. Different way of thinking.
No, I'm totally with you on that, and I completely see it the same way. Is there anything that we didn't cover that we should be covering?
Gosh, I don't know. We had a good talk.
I typically try for it. I mean, there are things that, of course, I can miss things very easily. So that's why I'm like, I want to make sure I put everything out there that we could talk about. I mean, you're doing a great job, and, obviously go down to acmecanine.com, check out Spike's dog blog. Questions, I'm sure that you have ways, you have emailed through there. There's definitely ways of checking you out, and I'll put it all in the description page as well.
Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. And, come back anytime, tell us more stories, and kind of tell us how we can be better pet parents, because honestly, even I need the help as well, and it's always beneficial to me to be able to learn from great people.
Well, I appreciate that, and I have enjoyed talking with you, and I think I'm going to write an article about kennel aggression.
Kennel aggression is an interesting one. All right, well, I'm Chris Green. Have a pet-tastic week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay, gotta go, it's my bedtime.